Oh, okay. We're going. Okay, I want to welcome you to the first of our West Sacramento Flood Protection Workshops. I'm Ken Rizich. I'm manager of Reclamation District 900 and also the Joint Powers Authority that is the local funding mechanism for our latest levee project. I want to introduce a few people. Wes Beers from City Council is here. Bill Denton, who's the president of Reclamation District 900 and on the JPA board. Kent Lang, who's from District 537. Les Harder, deputy director of Department of Water Resources. And then our speakers are going to be Lucy Edom is going to kind of facilitate and keep us in line. Mike Inamine is going to talk about the states program and some of the work they're doing. And then Ray Costa is going to do the technical review of what we've found with our project so far. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lucy.
Good evening, everyone. We're really pleased to see so many people show up tonight, so thank you for coming. I'm much shorter than Ken, so I'll try to crank this down. So anyway, we have a lot of information to go over tonight and are planning on covering a lot of ground. So I wanted to make sure that you all have copies of some things that were in the packet up front. So you should all have an agenda that looks like this. They ran out of packets. I think there are some more inside. Shanna, I think there's some right over there on the counter. Who needs a packet? Okay. We might need to have some copies made, but we can bring them in. I'll call on you again when the copies show up. So Megan, are you guys making more copies? Okay. So if you can raise your hand up again, we'll pass them out. It looks like we have enough. Then there's a copy of the PowerPoint, which should also be in your packet. There's an FAQ, frequently asked questions, which is also in the packet. And then just before I forget, you should have all received a newsletter, which is most likely how you heard about the workshop today. But if you didn't, we have extra copies of this that you can get from the group. And then we'd like to encourage you, if you have a business or if you're a member of a community organization, we develop these small little cards. They're called counter cards that if you would like to take copies of them to your organization or distribute them at Kiwanis or something like that, we have a lot of extra copies here, and we'd like to give you a stack of them to take with you because we'd like to inform as many people as possible about the flood protection program. So you can see the folks at the table when you're leaving tonight, and we can give copies to you there. So again, my name is Lucy, and I'll be serving as the meeting facilitator. There's a lot of folks in the room tonight, and there's a lot of information we're going to be sharing with you. So we want to make sure that we're able to get through everyone's questions and comments in the best way possible. So we've got a couple of recommendations on how to run the meeting tonight. So first and foremost, I just wanted to make a couple of suggestions on the process for tonight and see if we can all agree about how we're going to run the meeting to make sure that we're able to get through everything. So I'd like to suggest, first of all, we want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to speak and be heard. So I'll be calling on you during the Q&A if you haven't turned in a comment card to make sure that your question is able to be asked. If you want to talk to your neighbor, that is fine. We just ask that you go out in the hall and do it. It gets kind of distracting. I know sometimes you want to talk to your spouse or your neighbor about something that you just heard, but it's very difficult to hear for the rest of us. So you're welcome to do that out in the hall. If you could right now turn off the sound on your cell phones and pagers. And again, if you need to take a call, you can just step out in the hall. If you could hold questions until the end of the presentation. We've given you a copy of the PowerPoint so that you can jot down questions as you go. And we also had these question forms. And we'd like to ask that you fill out the form with your question on it, if possible, just because there's so much different information that we're going to be going through that we thought it would be helpful to kind of categorize the questions so that we're covering similar topics at the same time. So we are going to take a 5-minute break after the presentation to kind of organize the questions, and then we'll be starting to answer the questions as we go. So does anybody have any questions at this point in time? Okay. You do. And your question? We can, that got very loud. Kim, if we could get some copies of the question forms, that would be great. So if you need a copy, you can just hold your hand up in a second and we'll bring them around to you. So just my role tonight is kind of to oversee the pace and progress of the meeting, to make sure that all of your questions are able to be answered either in this room, or also we're going to be breaking into breakout sessions downstairs after the Q&A session, and that will give you the opportunity, if you live in a particular part of town and want to ask questions about a levee right in your backyard, there'll be folks on hand downstairs to answer your questions as well. Other than that, I'm going to just talk briefly about the agenda. We thought we'd break things down into just a 3-part process. And tonight we're really going to be focusing on where we were with the levees in West Sacramento and give you just a very brief history on their development and things that have been done over the years. And then talk about where we are today, what we found through the evaluations that have been conducted and other things. And then where we're going is mostly going to be touched at in future workshops. So tonight we're really focusing on the overview and history and the levee evaluations. And so there is going to be some information. The city and the Flood Control Agency are currently working on some things. Still, this is an evolving process. So there might be some questions that we can't answer tonight, and I know that there will be, but rest assured that we'll be able to answer all of your questions at coming workshops. And I hope that you've all seen that there are 3 more workshops after this evening that we're hoping that we'll see all of you at. So before I turn over the presentation, does anybody have any other questions? So again, I just encourage you to fill out the cards for the Q&A. We will be doing a Q&A after the presentation, and then when the Q&A is completed, we'll be moving downstairs, and there are a lot of folks down there that have the same information as the speakers who can answer more of your questions in a one-on-one setting downstairs. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ken, and he's going to start talking to you about the history of the levees and other important information. Is it Mike? Yeah. Sorry, it's Mike. And Mike, just so that you know, is from the Department of Water Resources. So Mike.
Good evening, and once again, thanks for participating in this workshop. Okay, what I'm going to do is, again, I'm with the State of California Division of Flood Management. What I'm going to do is give you an overview of what California is doing and how California is involved with flood control in West Sacramento, and hopefully to impart some of the coordination or a sense of the coordination that we're engaged in with both City of West Sacramento and the Corps of Engineers. Hopefully this heading for this slide is no big surprise with all the media attention due to recent events and the bond measures that recently passed. Many regions in California face unacceptable flood risks. For many of us, the events of not so distant past and many recent events have really focused a lot of attention on flood issues, 1986 floods, 97 floods, the Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and some of the lessons we learned from that catastrophic event. And probably the least known, or perhaps might be termed the mildest event, was the storms we underwent in 2006. Those storms were, statistically a big nothing. Statistically, they were not rare events. It was a run-of-the-mill storm, and yet the Sacramento and San Joaquin flood control systems suffered a great deal of damage, resulting in a lot of critical levee repairs and a lot of attention. And that storm, I think, pointed out more vividly than some of the more well-publicized events just how fragile flood control systems are in California. There's a term up there that's going to come up time and time again in the heading. Many regions face unacceptable flood risks. And I think it's important for folks to know a little bit about that term. It's used in a lot of different settings, has a lot of different meanings to people. For the purposes of our discussion this evening, I'm going to use the engineering term. And I swear, this is the only equation you'll have to remember for the rest of this evening. Risk is composed of two parts: the probability of bad things happening, and the second part is consequences should something bad happen. Okay, so it's the probability of something bad happening times consequences should something bad happening, like a levee failure. The reason that's important is because for most of this discussion this evening, we'll be talking about how the city of West Sacramento and the state of California are addressing the first part of that equation, addressing West Sacramento's vulnerability to bad things happening. Okay, I already screwed up, Lucy. Okay. Why don't we let the professional drive the rest of this session, okay? This slide points out how urgent the need is to address flood risk, particularly for major metropolitan areas. This graphic shows more vividly than anything I've ever seen how vulnerable the Sacramento area is. And I understand that, you know, there's the word Sacramento up there implies greater Sacramento, but West Sacramento is in that realm that you see up there in terms of flood risk. So these are the major cities that lie in the floodplains that lie along the banks of rivers throughout the country, and the Sacramento area, and that includes West Sacramento, is at the bottom of the list. And the distant second place runner-up is New Orleans pre-Katrina, which enjoyed about 250 years of flood protection. So it points out vividly just how vulnerable the Sacramento area is with regard to flood risk. Okay, next slide. These are just a couple of points, again, to point out some recent changes, why the state of California is involved in flood control in a much more proactive way, why the state of California is engaged with cities like the city of West Sacramento to promote and construct flood improvements. Most of the extensive flooding that can occur in California is in the Central Valley. By and large, the Sacramento-San Joaquin flood control systems provide flood protection, most of the flood protection in California. Most of the major metropolitan areas, they're by and large not protected by levee systems as extensive as the Central Valley. In addition, there's widespread local flood challenges. By local flooding, we mean like storm water. Water ends up on the street, goes in a culvert. That's a different situation than the kind of flooding that can occur here in West Sacramento due to a failure of a levee or overtopping of a levee due to river stage. Another point to make is that the state's water supply is threatened by fragile delta levees. The delta levees are fragile both by virtue of the way they were constructed, their construction materials. Delta levees are also working all the time. They're full-time levees. The water is always on those levees as opposed to other levee systems where the water only comes up during the wet season. And the state's water supply is threatened because water to two-thirds of the state is conveyed south through those very fragile levees. A very important point is that every taxpayer pays when state federal project levies fail. And this is due to a couple events. Most significantly, in 1986, a levee failed in the town of Linda on the Feather River, caused widespread damage. The state of California was successfully sued to the tune of $500 million, $500 million. And while that's a lot of money, the biggest impact of that suit was that the state was found liable for all the consequences of a levee failure. Okay, that's the second part of that equation I alluded to earlier. The state is liable, and that's not just the affected communities that pay for those sorts of damages. It's the state of California, every taxpayer in the state. And I think, you know, when the propositions were out on the street, 1E and 84 were out in the street, there was always some question about whether people understood that everybody in California was going to be paying for that, how people would vote. And I think people in general got it, that everybody pays for flood protection in the Central Valley. So that certainly got everybody's attention, particularly legislature, state government. Another thing happened most recently, and that was that a lot of federal funding for flood control projects, work that the federal government is normally obligated to pay for, a lot of that funding dried up. And for the first time, the state was funding and executing work that the federal government would normally do. And that was very unusual. It was really a paradigm shift, at least if it continues the way it's been going. And what it means, in addition to the paternal liability, which really puts the crosshairs on the state to fix levees or to be responsible for levees, in addition, much of the funding, burden of funding is going to be on the state, or has been on the state. And so those two factors are going to result, or have resulted, in the state being a lot more proactive in flood protection in California in a way that really never been seen in the state before. The last point, lessons from Katrina. There are a number of things that we've learned from Katrina. Major urban flooding is devastating, and the outcome is very uncertain. It still remains uncertain. New Orleans still has not recovered. The economic consequences of major urban flooding were, I think, by most accounts, were undercalculated. And they've been much greater than anybody really foresaw. Emergency response preparation saves lives. All of us saw evidence of that in our news screens as it was happening, as the events were unfolding, Katrina. And the last point, and a point that I think applies in particular to West Sacramento and the work that the state of California is doing in your community, is that a piecemeal approach degrades flood control systems. Les Harder and I were in New Orleans soon after Katrina, and we looked at flood walls that were, there was one flood wall right next to another flood wall, and there was a distance between the elevations of these two flood walls that were like this. And they were protecting against the same water stage. And the reason for that was that there were changes in jurisdiction. There was one flood control agency that butted right up against another flood control agency. The flood didn't know that. The water stage, it made no difference to water stage. And so, obviously, the lower stage was more vulnerable to flooding. And failures resulted as a result of some of that piecemeal approach to flood protection. That applies not only to the construction or physical facilities that protect us from flooding, it also applies to the way that engineers evaluate flood control systems. A lot of flood control systems are evaluated in sort of a piecemeal way by a lot of different entities. In West Sacramento has done a lot of the right things in going out and investigating their levees. The state of California came in with a separate levee evaluations program, but pretty much looking at the same things, as you'll see later in this presentation. And it's extremely important to us that we not fall prey to those pitfalls of piecemealing both the execution of construction of flood control facilities, but also the evaluations. Next slide. I'm going to talk very briefly about FloodSAFE, and if there are more specific questions, this is one of those topics that's probably best left for the breakout session later this evening. FloodSAFE California is sort of the overarching state strategy or approach to flood control in California. Purpose of FloodSAFE California, or to define FloodSAFE California, it's a strategic initiative under development by the Department of Water Resources to improve flood protection for the people of California. The goals of this program are to reduce flood risks to the people of California, their homes and property, state's infrastructure, and public trust resources. Number 2, to develop a sustainable flood management system for the future. One of the major issues with flood control in California is that there's never been a reliable source of funding. With the passage of bonds 1E and 84, we have an opportunity to provide viable, sustainable financing for flood protection in California long after those bond monies are gone. And the last bullet is to reduce the adverse consequences of floods when they do occur. Regardless of what we do to levees, there's always risk associated with living behind a levee. Flooding will always occur. Now, the risk or the probability of something bad happening may be very low, no more than if you decide to cross the street on a busy afternoon. But we need to reduce the consequences of floods when they do occur, and they will occur. Okay, next slide. There's a couple of major pieces to FloodSAFE California, and I'll go through these very quickly. And the topic of this discussion is contained in this first bullet: design and construction work for urgent repairs and improvements, including levee evaluations and Delta levee programs. Reimbursement for the local share of federal flood control projects, construction outside the Central Valley. These are projects that are outside of what we call the Central Valley Flood Control Project. Statewide grants for construction of stormwater flood management projects, non-structural flood corridor projects, urban streams restorations, and floodplain delineations. And the last item, major item, is regional flood plans and the California Flood Plan. The California Flood Plan is the overarching strategy to flood protection in California. Regional flood plans would be created by local communities like this community, along with affected neighbors. Okay, next slide. Now, I'm going to be talking, this slide just points out the major elements of what the state of California, what Division of Flood Management is doing with regard to geotechnical levee evaluations in West Sacramento. It's coordinated with the presentation that Ray will be giving on the West Sacramento levee evaluations program, both looking at pretty much the same things, both conforming to the same criteria. Now, the State of California program is looking at levees that protect population centers of 10,000 people or more, and it's termed the Urban Levee Evaluations Program. Later on, you'll be hearing about a non-urban or rural levee evaluations program, and that has yet to get kicked off. We're only looking at state federal project levees. These are levees that have been accepted by the Corps of Engineers into the state federal project and operated and maintained by the state of California or by local reclamation districts like here in West Sacramento. We're looking at levees with respect to seepage, static and seismic stability, settlement, and erosion. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. Ray will talk a little bit later on specifically what that means. And the goal for West Sacramento and the state for urban areas is to provide at least 200-year flood protection for affected communities, and also to meet, at a minimum, the Corps of Engineers and FEMA criteria for certification. At the conclusion of our study, we will be providing alternatives for any identified deficiencies. And that means that in addition to evaluating the structural integrity of levees that encircle West Sacramento, we'll be providing preliminary designs and cost estimates for how to address any identified deficiencies. And finally, the last bullet is to augment West Sacramento's levee evaluation program.
Okay, I'm going to run you through just a little bit of history of where we've been and how we got to where we're at right now. So, as you can see, let me get the pin. We're surrounded by we have the Yolo bypass, the Sacramento bypass, the river all the way around the perimeter. So virtually all of, except for this little segment of the south, which is also subject to flooding from the south, we actually are pretty much during high water surrounded by high water. So obviously for us it's really important to really work on this levee system and make sure it performs the way it's supposed to, and to protect the people who live here. So next slide. Here's a little history of kind of what we've done. The levees were constructed in the early 1900s by reclamation districts. District 537 is kind of in the Bright area. District 811 is in the Broderick area, and then kind of the southern 80% of City of West Sacramento is in Reclamation District 900. They each, at that time, had their own separate levee systems that protected the people who live within those areas. In 1993, the Deepwater Channel was constructed. That altered some of our facilities. The navigation levee took the place of our western levee. The history of flood control here is that over time, as the need arose, we made improvements to the system. They're always dependent on funding. Typically after major high water events, funding becomes available, and so typically after high water events is when you get the bulk of your work done. And one of the events that prompted a lot of the recent work was two things. One was that the high water in 1986. We had some very high water flows, and did some flood fighting, and the whole system was stressed, and so there was federal and state money available after that. And at the same time, that's when the city was incorporated in 1988, and so the incorporation of the city required new FEMA maps, and so we had to evaluate the new FEMA maps, and based on the experiences in 1986. It was determined that there were several improvements that needed to be made in order to meet the new criteria at that time. And so the city did some levee repairs. District 537 did some repairs. Reclamation District 900 repaired another section. And then we also got funding for a stability berm in Southport that improved the performance of the river levee. So when we did all that stuff and submitted all that data to FEMA, we had been given a temporary, what they call an A99 zone, which means we're working towards getting our maps back. And by about 1995, we had actually satisfied all the new criteria and were zoned back into Zone X, which means you have to meet the FEMA criteria and you have 100-year protection. So at the same time, we had cost shared with the Corps on a feasibility study to provide a much higher level of protection for the community. And it became obvious that in order to meet the local cost sharing portion of that we were going to have a funding mechanism. So that's when our local JPA was formed, which provides the local share of that project. In order to, we felt it was really important to have that be successful. So Reclamation District 900 actually cut their assessment rate in half, and the new JPA picked up the other half. So there was very little increase in out-of-pocket expense for local landowners, which at the time seemed like a really good idea, but 12 years later, RD 900 is kind of suffering from having cut our assessment in half, so we're going to have to deal with that. But we were successful. The assessment was passed. It funded West Sacramento project. And if you go to the next slide, maybe one more. I need a map. One more. There we go. this is the West Sacramento project here. And basically, we took all the way from the Deepwater Channel up Interstate 80 and then behind the CHP Academy and back over to the river. We improved those levees significantly. We, in some places, raised them as much as 5 feet, made them much wider at the base. In some cases, tore the levee completely down and just started over again with it. And then there was a section of about a mile along here where we actually went to the base of the levee and installed a 70-foot deep slurry wall to cut off a sand layer. That's similar to the under seepage criteria we're dealing with now. But anyhow, that was what happened at that time. So if you go back a couple slides now. So over time, we've improved them. Generally, they've performed well. We haven't had any flooding. We've had instances where we've had to do some flood fighting and do repairs after events. They are significantly better than they were 20 years ago. But now we have new criteria that we have to meet, and so we're moving forward on that. Okay, next slide. The stability berm that we built in Southport cost about $9 million, and we had to come up locally with about $800,000 for that project. And then in the West Sacramento project, the one along the bypasses, was a $32 million. We strengthened and reconstructed about 5 miles of levee, and today we've ponied up about $3.6 million as our local share of that project. So you can see that the average local contribution is about a dime on the dollar, or has been for those projects. It's very important to have your local share, because if you don't have your local share, you don't get your federal and state money. So, okay, and next slide. And just go one more. So, anyhow, just to sum up, what's happened. What happened now is that when we constructed the West Sacramento project, that project was designed to provide a very high level of protection for West Sacramento. There was enough value here to warrant doing that. By the time we had finished the project, the criteria changed enough that it was just slightly over 200-year level of protection. And now the criteria is once again changed, and we are evaluating what impact that'll have on ours. And Ray Costa is going to tell us about the results of our investigations and tell you all about that new criteria and stuff like that.
Thank you, Ken. Lucy, we're all sure Ken is. So, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out tonight and giving us the opportunity to tell you what we're doing about trying to assess the levees that provide the protection here for the city. Thank you. It's been quite a team effort that the city has put together here. There's a lot of players involved in this, and a lot of very experienced engineers dealing with flood control issues here in West Sacramento. I want to just pause for a minute. Ken talked a little bit about the history of the levees. If you really want to see some interesting pictures, in Ken's office, he has some old photographs of some of the levee construction that took place way back in the 1900s. And these photographs vary from a mule team and wooden buckboards hauling soil to be placed in the levee. Some other ones involve a dredge working its way across the Yolo bypass. I don't know if a lot of you know or not, that used to be basically a swamp. And some interesting pictures of a dredge picking up clumps of tules and putting it in a pile. And that's now your flood protection along there. Another interesting picture of a dredge going down through the Sacramento River and dredging up sand from the river, making levees out of that. And you think you're at the beach when you see all this sand. So that was fine back then when they were protecting agricultural property, but now we have a lot of people and property there. And as Ken said, the levees have been improved. The levees are in better shape than they've ever been. And this team is out to look at these conditions and see what we can do to improve upon those conditions. It's there's multiple players involved. One of the things the city wants to do is be very proactive in finding out what these conditions are. As a result, you've got 2 teams working in different areas to speed up the whole process. There's a team led by HDR and with Kleinfelder as a geotechnical consultant. I'm a consultant for Kleinfelder. And that team has been working in basically the southern part of the city. And then another team, as Mike mentioned, Department of Water Resources has a geotechnical consultant, URS consultants that are also here tonight. And they've been working up in the northern half. And these 2 teams working together have been able to do a lot of work and expedite this process so we can find out what the conditions are out there. I might also add that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, basically the flood control experts for the nation, are been providing very close review and local support. So there's, I'd like to say there's a lot of very experienced people looking at these conditions around here. Okay, what are we finding? Next slide. First of all, when you evaluate levees, you've heard Mike mention a few things and Ken mention a few things, but there's a certain criteria we look at. I'll go into more what that criteria is, but there's some accepted standards on what a proper levee should, the shape it should be, the strength it should be, how impermeable it should be, and there's some national standards and guidelines that are used. So we're using those national standards. Now, Ken mentioned there's been a lot of work that's been done. Why is there more work to do? Well, these standards change with time. And as evidenced by some of the things that happened in New Orleans with the Katrina flooding, as well as what we experienced here in 1986 and 1997, it's an evolving process that we learn more, and we're using all these lessons learned to establish the criteria that should provide the proper safety for all the people in West Sacramento. And we're not just looking at, you may hear about a 100-year flood or a 200-year flood. Just to make sure you know, a 100-year flood doesn't mean if it comes along, you got 100 years, you don't have to worry about it. Really what it means is it has a 1% chance of occurrence in any year. And it seems like we've had a lot of those big events all in a row here. A 200-year is actually a 0.5% chance of occurring in any particular year. So just because we had some big ones in 1986 and 1997 doesn't mean that we've got a free pass for another 100 years. It could come along at any time. Next slide, please. Okay, what are we doing out there? I imagine maybe a lot of you have seen there have been a lot of drill rigs out there as soils engineers, and as these are soil embankments. We've got to go out and we've got to find out what are these embankments made of. You know, we're not good enough yet. We don't have that X-ray vision, although we're working on a few things that are helping that. We go out with a drill rig. You can see a drill rig. This is actually a drill rig from a West Sacramento levee. And we take core samples. We drill down and we take a continuous sample of the soil as we go down. And in some cases we go down as much as 150, 180 feet. So we're going very deep to find out what these conditions are, because as you'll see on another diagram, these deep conditions will actually affect the stability of a surface levee. We get these nice core samples, we take them back to our laboratory, and we run tests on them. How strong is this soil? In other words, how well is it going to be able to stand up, hold its own weight? How will it resist the force of water against it? What's the permeability of these materials? Will water freely pass through these embankments, or will it tend to hold the water back? How heavy is the material? You know, it's very important to know a lot of the parameters of the soils in order to go through and do an analysis. I mentioned X-ray vision. The state now has undergone a program, or is currently doing a program You may have actually seen something about it in the newspaper, where they're using some of these new techniques, remote sensing techniques, basically a helicopter flying over the levees with a device that can read a lot of the magnetics of the earth or some of the properties of the earth. And with this information, we're able to supplement, going along and drilling holes every 500 or 1,000 feet. It's what's in between. What are we not seeing? What might we be missing? So with this, some of this these new techniques, we're able to go out and do continuous surveys and look for, we may find something. What's this? It may be an old pipeline that nobody knew about. There may have been an old pipeline that a farmer might have put in to get water from the river. We want to know as much as we can. It's that hidden defect, I think Mike mentioned, that we're doing everything we can to try to find. What do we do with this information? Well, we evaluate what the seepage conditions are. In other words, when this seepage goes through a levee, does it weaken the levee? Does it cause slides? Does it carry material with it? You might have heard terms like piping and internal erosion, where if there's enough force of water and it's going fast enough through a levee, it'll wash material out and make a hole and kind of work its way back to the river. We're also concerned about erosion. How fast is that water going by? Is it going fast enough that it's going to erode the materials? As I mentioned before, a lot of these levees, especially along the Sacramento River, were made by sand dredged up from the bottom of the river. You can imagine it's very erodible. Wouldn't take much in the way of a velocity to go through and erode that. So we assess the erodibility of the material. And then we also look at the, we call freeboard. Freeboard meaning it's like if you're out in a boat in a lake and you look and you see where the water is in the lake and you see where the top of your boat is. That's the freeboard. That's your safety factor from the water coming over the top. Same thing in levees. We look at how high will the water get in that 100-year or 200-year event. Well, you know what? We want a safety factor above that. We want to know that we've got some extra splash space above that. Next slide. And these are why we want to know a lot of this information. You can see in the slide in the upper left-hand corner, this is an area where there wasn't much freeboard. There wasn't much safety factor from that water surface condition, and this levee is actually being overtopped. You can see another one where a lot of wave action. This is something that might be critical out along the Yolo Bypass. I'm sure many of you have driven across the Yolo Bypass during the high water conditions, seen the big waves that come out across there, and those waves terminate on your levees along the Yolo Bypass. What kind of impact, what kind of damage might those waves do? This is a diagram kind of showing this underseepage. This is something I'll talk a little bit more about later. This is really a condition that has been found to exist in this whole Sacramento Valley. It's a relic of, believe it or not, back when the glaciers in the Sierra Nevada melted and washed down all this coarse material. Since then, it's been covered up. So you don't really know it, but there's a lot of very permeable material down underneath these levees. A lot of it, in some cases, is connected to the river, and so that pressure that's in the river just likes to go underneath that levee and be a pressure on the land side. You can see the water side here, a flow path, that boil I talked about, that eroded hole that would tend to work its way back. And really what happens is the levee winds up slumping into the hole, the levee overtops. This kind of failure mechanism is what is thought to have caused the 1986 levee break up on the Yuba River, as well as the 1997 levee break along the Feather River. So it's something that we're really concerned about and we're really watching for in your system. And then this is the Jones Tract levee break. This is, we've got some Department of Water Resources people here who probably address that better than I can, but this was sort of why did this happen? Here it is in the middle of the summer, no big high flood event. We had the levee fail. Was it an old rodent hole? Was it a beaver activity? What was it some seepage? There's a lot of ideas on what may be, but we certainly want to avoid the blue sky levee failure. Next, please. I mentioned erosion. These are some of the types of, along the bank of the river, if you've been fortunate enough to enjoy the waterways out here and look, you can see that there's been a lot of erosion along the bank. Again, it's that sandy material that was placed there that is eroding away. Here, as you can see, some emergency repairs to try to control erosion along one area. Next, please. This is, Mike used one equation. I'm going to try to stay out of all equations tonight, but this is the type of analysis that a geotechnical engineer, a levee engineer would do. We go out, we get those borings, we find out what is the stratigraphy under that levee? What's it sitting on? What's the levee made out of? Once we know that, we can go through and we can look and say, what are the threats to this levee? In this case, we have a permeable layer through here that, is that potential underseepage problem I talked to you about. That's the underseepage risk. Through seepage, that's quite frankly, that's seepage that just goes plain through the levee. That was the big risk here in West Sacramento in 1986, and the project that Ken talked about, the big repair project that was done down in the south area, and also same problems that happened in Natomas as well as the pocket area with these sandy levees is water was going through those levees so fast and eroding material and causing it to be weak that it was just sloughing away, and they almost lost the levee. So after 1986, if you've been out in the south part of town, you'll see a little hump at the landside toe. Well, that little hump there is a buttress, to protect against that through seepage concern. Freeboard talked about, how much room, are our levees high enough? Are they tall enough? Are they going to contain that 100-year storm or that 200-year storm? Got a couple spots a little low, not a real big issue. And then erosion. I think a lot of you saw this last summer, the governor declared an emergency to get out and do a lot of bank protection or erosion protection projects along the river. West Sacramento benefited from some of that emergency work, and there was some bank protection work done over here to take care of erosion. Next. Another example of that erosion, this is in West Sacramento. You can see we're starting to cut back underneath the levee. And then we have slope stability. We all kind of know if you pile soil too high, too steep, it'll fail under its own weight. We've got some pretty steep slopes out along the Sacramento River, probably due to erosion that's taken place over the years and gradually steepened those slopes as eroded back into the levee. Next, please. Okay, how can we fix this? Well, we've got a number of things that we can do to fix it. Ken talked about some of them earlier, but let me tell you about some of the fixes that you'll likely see out here on your West Sacramento levees. First of all, we can do what's called a cutoff wall. We can go along and through the levee, we install basically a low permeability or an impermeable trench. Well, we fill a trench with this impermeable clay, and we stop that seepage. We stop the seepage, or slow it down quite a bit. We don't completely stop it. I shouldn't say that, but we stop that through seepage that's going through. but we also stop that underseepage that's going through. And what we try to do is the pressure that may be built up out here in the river, we try to give ourselves a barrier. In some cases, those cutoff walls are up to 80 feet deep. You can build them. This is the world's largest backhoe that has about a 80-foot deep reach with its arm, goes along the levee, cuts a trench, and then it's backfilled or replaced with this cement clay mixture that hardens. It's not concrete, but it's a stiff clay with a real low permeability that, again, knocks down those seepage pressures that would go through. In some cases, on the other side of the river, there's some of these cutoff walls are actually 110 foot deep. So we're talking about significant seepage issues, significant thicknesses of real permeable material that, again, we're trying to reduce that pressure on the land side that's trying to lift it up and be an unsafe condition. Another thing that can be done is, depending upon available room, is what's called a seepage berm. Now, I talked a little bit about down in the south part of town where after 86 we put that stability berm, that little hump that you see at the toe of the levee. Well, that's for that through seepage issue. There's a seepage berm that we can actually construct, again, on the land side. And what it does is, in the simplest terms, it provides weight to counteract that pressure that's going underneath and trying to push up. And those seepage berms, they might be anywhere from 3 to 7 feet thick and can extend out from the toe of the levee anywhere from 100 to 300 feet. But it's just another tool that can be used to counteract that underseepage pressure that we're getting. Next, please. Certainly for erosion, this is a photo of a completed site in West Sacramento. Again, the one I mentioned, the emergency repair areas that were done this last summer. Certainly a classic way to deal with the erosion is to put good, hard, durable rock down there. It's heavy, it's not going to be moved by the currents, and it's going to protect the erodible materials below. Slope flattening, I mentioned to you we've got some steep slopes out there. Certainly one way to deal with a steep slope is flatten it. So there'll be some areas where we'll likely use, flatten these steep slopes to give it more stability. And then I mentioned in some areas we don't have that freeboard, we don't have that safety factor. We'll probably raise a few levees in a few spot locations, and I can kind of show you those in a little bit. Okay. What are we finding? First of all, I want to point out that this is preliminary information. We've gone out, we've done some of these initial core borings, we've analyzed the results. The state and their consultant have gone out, and they've also done that. We're still getting this information from this remote surveys I talked about, so we're going to be looking at that. Something else very important that I haven't mentioned yet is, we spend a lot of time talking to people like Ken to find out where the problem's been, so we can target those areas. This last year, there have been a couple of areas, one down by Davis Road, another up by the Lighthouse Marina project, where there were seeps. Okay, well, we know there's something going on there, and so we're concentrating certainly on those areas. But on a very preliminary basis, and I'm not going to start in any particular order. Let's just start at the top and work our way around clockwise. On a very preliminary basis, up along this reach of the Sacramento River, we're finding potentially, some of those through seepage issues we talked about, those sand levees. Might need to do something up there. Around the corner, I mentioned that this last year we had a few little sand boils that have shown up. Probably need to take a close look at some of this under seepage problems along there. as you get around the corner, maybe if you've been out in that area, you know there's some pretty steep levee slopes along there. We're probably going to do some slope flattening. Maybe some of those through seepage problems, again, from the sand levees. And then we get along my favorite stretch where the ground is really high and really is no definable levee out there, and I can feel real good about that. So certainly, you know, we wouldn't need to do any work along there. As you go down along this reach of the Sacramento River, that's the reach that Ken talked about where we did the through seepage mitigation after 1986. Probably going to need to be some under seepage remediation done along there. Probably some of those deep cutoff walls that we talked about, probably need to do that. Certainly we have some erosion issues all along the Sacramento River. We went out, we got the emergency ones, but we've got some other ones that need to be addressed, or they will soon, you know, be back into the levee footprint. Going across the bottom here, this is kind of a dry land levee there. It's, as Ken mentioned, it's kind of your protection from the south. If there was a failure down below, the water that might back up into the city. There's probably some issues we need to look at along here. There's a levee along here that is kind of that old Thule levee I talked about. It's not in very good condition, but the good news is the water in the ship channel here doesn't get very high, and it really is probably as a result. There's a couple of pump stations we're going to have to take a look at where there's a canal that comes up next to the levee, and we'll look at those. And then there's this deep water ship channel levee, or this navigation levee that was constructed. What you can't see is that levee is actually 22 miles long. It goes quite a ways down, and really it was put in when the ship channel was constructed so that water in the Yolo bypass would not obviously go through this gap in the levee. It has to go all the way down 22 miles and back up, and that keeps that water level low. Certainly we're concerned. I talked about that wave impact that happens out in the Yolo bypass. We want to make sure that navigation levee has to be strong and stable to keep those water levels down as the water goes back into the city. And then along this stretch, Ken mentioned that that's a lot of the work that the Corps of Engineers improved a number of years ago. They raised the levee. They put a lot of rock on it. There might still be a little bit more work that needs to be done along this reach. But so that pretty much summarizes kind of what we found to date. I want to leave you with this thought, though. Anything that we found out here, we haven't found anything that's unsafe. I don't want anybody to go home tonight and worry about their levees. What we found is some conditions that, as Mike said, it has a little higher risk than it should have. When you consider what's at stake, the number of people here and the property, we just don't have that factor safety that we should have. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to give this urban area a higher factor safety so that we can feel even better about some of these higher flood events. So with that, I think that does it for me. Thank you.
Next slide. Just kind of putting some dollar cost to what Ray just talked about, just based on preliminary studies to date. Our total cost for implementing all of those repairs is in the $400 million range. That's very preliminary. There's a lot of refinement that needs to be done with all that, but that gives you a kind of a ballpark estimate of kind of the range of what we're looking at. If you think about our last project was 32 million and 9 million, so maybe 40 million, and all of a sudden we're faced with a $400 million project. So this is a big deal, and it's going to require an awful lot of effort to resolve all these issues. But the way to do it is to work through a combination of federal, state, and local funds, and it'll happen through a series of phased projects. Depending on where the funding comes from, and we'll phase the projects until we resolve all the issues. So, statewide, Prop 1E and 84 provided about $4.9 billion for flood protection. Mike won't give all of that to us, but we'll have, if we can raise our local share, we will qualify for some of the state and federal funding that would allow us to get started on the project. The $4.9 billion is not enough to fix the entire state system. There's an awful lot of work that needs to be done, but it's prioritized, and a fair amount of the money will go to the urban areas. There will be work done in the rural areas as well, but a fair amount will go to the urban areas. So we're trying to get ahead of the game and get our problems identified and get our projects designed so that we can start on our work. Historically, we've been funding about 10 cents on every dollar on our previous projects. If you go to the next slide. But that's still, that's a lot of money, and we have to have local funding. So there's really two proposed sources of it. One is a new assessment. We have an existing assessment, and it would be, if the new assessment passes, it would be wrapped into the old one would be wrapped into the new one, so you wouldn't be paying two separate assessments. But yeah, that's one of the things we're still working on how that's going to be structured, but it'll be basically based on that formula that Mike gave you, that's based on risk and consequences. So how deep the water will get and what the value of property is being protected. We're also looking at some contribution for new development. So when new development comes in, they'll be paying a portion of the cost. So I think that's it. Just in wrapping up, I want to really thank everybody for coming out. We've got a really nice crowd tonight, and this is a really important issue, and the more people to become knowledgeable about this, the better we are in evaluating our next steps. So with that, I'll turn it back to Lizzie.
So I'm sure there are a lot of you that are anxious to find out what the cost of the assessment is going to be to you, and that's something that we'll be talking about at upcoming workshops. We don't have that information tonight, and I know that that's probably difficult for those of you who are anxious to hear that, but we are going to have information at future workshops, so I just wanted you to be aware of that. We wanted to set the stage tonight for you to have an understanding of where we are right now. So just by show of hands, can I see how many of you would like to ask a question so I can get a sense of, you can raise them kind of high. Okay. So I think what we can probably do is not use the comment cards. And just as a reminder, there is going to be the breakout stations downstairs, and there are large maps down there. All of these experts and many others who are throughout the room are here to answer your questions one-on-one as well. So I just wanted to remind you of that. So I'm going to start in this side of the room, and if I could see the show of hands again, I just ask you to stand up and state your question so everyone can hear it, and then we'll respond to your questions. So I'm going to start with the woman right there in the glasses. Yes, you. Okay. Does anyone, do you have your question written down? How many people have questions that have their questions written down? Because I'd like to know who to direct these questions to. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take just a 3 or 4 minute break, and if those of you who have comment cards can hold them up right now, then Kim and Megan will pick them up from you, and we'll organize the questions so I know who to direct them to, and we'll be back with you in a couple of minutes. So there is water downstairs if anybody'd like to go grab some water, and there are cookies as well, and we'll just see you back here at about 17 to 8 if you want to take a quick break. Thank you. So we're going to get through the majority of these questions. There are a couple of questions that are very detailed that we're going to ask that you ask down at the table at the end, but for the most part, we're going to be able to answer your questions right here from the podium. So I'm going to start out having Steve Patek from the City of West Sacramento answer some questions, and I'll just read the first question, and then he will answer. And actually, there's a number of them. If I receive in the mail an offer to buy flood insurance from my home, should I buy it? I thought that a few years ago this area was not insurable for floods. When did this change, and what sort of flood insurance is recommended?
Thank you. It's a little bit confusing. The question, the statement was you thought the area was uninsurable. Actually, that's not true. You can buy flooding. What's been happening for most of our lifetime, in fact, is flood insurance was not required if you have a federal insured mortgage. But basically what you'll hear from everybody here is you live behind a levee, get flood insurance. There's a form of flood insurance that's available now that's called preferred risk. It's relatively inexpensive compared to full flood insurance. You can get it through any of your insurance agents generally, and it's very much recommended. There may come a time, based on what we've found out and based upon when FEMA begins to look at this area, that mapping will change and flood insurance will be required. There are going to be a number of cases where if you have flood insurance, the preferred risk policy in place before they remap, you'll be able to maintain a lower level of flood insurance cost per year than if you try to come in after the remap and buy flood insurance. So we definitely recommend buying flood insurance.
Now that we know the condition of our levees, how will this affect development in West Sacramento?
We'd almost certainly say that it will affect development in West Sacramento, but I don't know that we could say with any great accuracy exactly how. It's certainly going to present some obstacles. We now know there are going to be some additional costs for development in West Sacramento. We're going to be looking to development to help contribute to the solution through financially. And I think kind of those of us that are already here behind the levee, we're here. We need to get out. We need to access all the resources we can get, and that will include participation from redevelopment. I think also this community has described a vision of what it wants to be, that it wants to grow, that it wants to have revitalize itself and continue to expand and improve, and development is certainly part of that. But I would certainly expect that it could be, certainly would slow things down.
Levees serve as important recreation and green state areas and are good locations for bike trails, et cetera. When doing all this work, can we leave or create bike walking trails in place?
We have, in fact, shown the tops of almost all of our levees as bike trails. There's been a long-term plan to take the Southport levee, the South River Road levee, and convert that to either a full bike trail or a limited vehicle access that could be then safer for bikes. We've talked about bike trails and hiking trails and equestrian trails along the west side levee of Southport, the east side of the ship channel, and we've even talked about, in longer terms, a levee along the main levee, the navigation levee, the bypass that might go all the way down to almost to the Bay Area, but that's a long one. So certainly we have always planned that these levees would be places for bike trails. Now, when they're rebuilding the levee, you're probably not going to be able to get on it with a bike, but we're hoping that certainly we get back to it as quickly as possible.
Are we going to only settle for 100 to 200 year protection when we know that's only the minimum?
We're going to go for the highest level of protection that A, we have resources to be able to afford, and B, that we're allowed. One of the issues that really is that people are wrestling with, of course, is Nobody wants their levee, the levee on the other side of the river, to be higher than the levee on your side of the river. And DWR and the Rec Board are very careful about that. They don't want what they call levee inequality. And generally, height is not the main issue for us. We have generally the height in the freeboard, so it's a structural, more of a structural, and we'll certainly look to make that structurally. We don't think there's, it's not going to cost twice as much to get to 200 years as it does to 100 years. So I would just say we're going to try to get the highest level of protection we can get within the limitations.
So now I'd like to ask Caroline Quinn to come up from the City of West Sacramento, and she'll respond to this question, which is, will the city be ready to request funding from the state for appropriation this year?
The city has, in fact, been having conversations with our state officials and our federal officials with regard to funding that we need to implement our next phases of work. And we have requests in at both the federal level and the state level for funding those next phases of work. The state is still in the process of developing exactly how they're going to, an expenditure plan for their bond funds. There is a category that will help fund continuing levee evaluations and the next step that we would be taking, and we're hoping to, we're ready to move on to that next step, and we're in a conversation with the state and with our elected officials to secure those funds.
And if Les Harder could come up front from the Department of Water Resources, he's going to answer these questions. What is the levee freeboard in feet for West Sacramento, and how will it be affected by global warming?
Not in the right direction. To a certain extent, I don't know exactly what the freeboard is throughout the system. Maybe Ken should answer that part of the question. But with regard to climate change, global warming, we are already seeing the effects of that. That's one of the reasons why we're having to redesign and reevaluate a lot of the levees, is because the storms we have now are much more powerful than the ones that were around 100 years ago when the system was basically conceived. One of the things that's going on now, of course, with climate change and global warming is that California is losing its largest flood control reservoir, which is the snowpack. So we're going to lose about 25% of the snowpack is projected within the next 50 years or so. That has enormous implications, not just for water supply, but for flood control. We're going to have larger storms, larger water coming down, won't stay up there as snow, it'll be coming down to the valley. So we have to protect our system and adapt to it. I think the evaluations we're going to be doing now are you going to use existing federal criteria. We're going to follow that and work with the local partners to try and do that. But I think when we actually design and work with the federal government and our local partners on the fixes, we will probably put an extra component, an additional factor or margin to address future climate change. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that this round of repairs and investigations is part of a continual process. As time goes on, as climate change continues, we're going to have to continually relook at the system, reevaluate it for the changes that we see, and probably have to upgrade the protection, not just for the effects of climate change, but also because we're putting more people behind the levees at risk.
Okay, and then if Mike could come up again from the Department of Water Resources, there are a couple of questions. One is, why are the state and regional doing the same thing? Shouldn't they coordinate so there's not a double cost? And then there is a question directed to Ken, so I'll let Mike answer this first.
There's a couple of tiers of programs. The state is setting the strategy for how we're going to address flood control issues at a very high level. I think, hopefully, as you've seen in this presentation today, when it comes down to the regional level, for example, for West Sacramento, there's no double spending of money. West Sacramento started a little bit before we did in their levee evaluations program, for example, and we got with the city and the city got with us and we very closely coordinated our efforts so that we were, in effect, augmenting and filling in the information blanks for the City of Sacramento's overall flood control improvements. What you're going to start hearing about in the future, and I think I alluded to it earlier, is that you're going to start hearing about regional flood control plans. Regional flood control plans are a centerpiece of flood control for California. Everything that West Sacramento does, to improve its levees, it has obviously has a benefit for the people of West Sacramento. Any improvements beyond what pre-existed flood control here, as was alluded earlier, has an effect on neighbors downstream or even upstream. And so what you do in West Sacramento has a regional effect. So there's a lot of coordination that has to take place with all of your neighbors. And that's one of the centerpieces of the overall strategy for flood control in California.
So Ken will answer the question for the $400 million, what does it do to the risk? And then it says 1% to question mark.
Okay, the purpose of doing the $400 million fix is to fix all of the problems that where we don't meet the new criteria. So the criteria for 100-year, and our objective is to achieve 200-year or better protection. So at a bare minimum, we will achieve enough to get our FEMA certification to raise a level of protection for this community to a minimum of 100-year, but our objective is something in excess of 200-year, and that's what we do. So.
The next questions are for Ray. The first one is, rather than raise levees, why not in dry years dredge silt, tree stumps, trash, and make the river deeper with more capacity, likewise with contributory creeks?
That's a good question. Let me tell you a few of the things that are involved with that. First of all, as was just mentioned, we have neighbors to be a little concerned about. If you start dredging the river and changing the plumbing of the valley, in other words, you lower the river level in one area, how many people realize that in the northern part of the city, the Sacramento River actually changes directions and flows upstream to the Sacramento bypass? All that is a careful balance of water going one direction and another. If you start getting in and dredging and changing channel capacities, you might cause more water to go down to your neighbor that they might not be too happy about. So there's a concern with how you might affect the plumbing around you. Second is that we're still dealing with the events that took place in the late 1800s and early 1900s in California, and that was the gold rush, when there was a lot of hydraulic mining that took place up in the mountains. Hundreds of millions of cubic yards of sediment were washed down into the rivers and are, quite frankly, are still moving through the system. We get out, we dredge. I can tell you that up on the Feather River, there's a tremendous supply of sediment that still wants to come down. We're talking about a 50-year project here. If we did get into a dredging program, it would have to be kind of a continual type thing because there's sediment still moving through the system. Unfortunately, also a part of the relic of that process, there's some nasty things in some cases in the sediments going through. There's a lot of mercury that was used in the gold recovery process. There's some of the chemicals that were used in our ag areas in the past. And so even if we did dredge, the disposal of sediments is an issue that if it contains some of these heavy metals and toxic substances, to try to find a place to put that. One last thing is if you can picture in your mind that cross-section that I mentioned up there, and I talked to you about that underseepage, that water going underneath the levee. you make that hole deeper on the water side, you're exposing more of that layer for that charge action, and there's more pressure that can build up. You know, if you know, to a certain extent, there's a little bit of a liner there. You have to be real careful. You start penetrating that liner and getting down into more permeable layers, you could be causing yourself some problems. It's something that it's looked at, but I'm giving you some of the reasons why it typically isn't done through this reach.
So the next question, I'll be curious to hear after the meeting what your profession is, because you're obviously in a technical profession. The question is, continuous coring does not always mean continuous retrieval of core. Drilling loose, and I can't even read the whole question, so Ray may need to finish it, can produce a retrieval of only 50% or less. Current exploration is not utilizing borehole geophysics to produce a continuous log, which can be used to correlate with a lithology log. Is due diligence being served? And actually, if Ray can give a very short answer to this, this is probably a great question for the table. So we'll see if he can do it fairly quickly, and then you can see him downstairs for the rest of the answer.
Is my boss in the audience here tonight? Is it a ringer question? It's a very good comment. I would look for me later on. I'd like to individually tell you some of the things that we're doing. We are getting very good retrieval. We are using other tools. I didn't mention earlier the cone penetrometer, where we push a device in the ground and we get a continuous reading of what's through there. We're doing some drilling methods, sonic drilling, where we vibrate a casing in the ground through coarse materials. We are getting 100% recovery. You know, in some cases we're not, but it's 150 feet down. We kind of don't care. We want to know for sure what's up in the action zone, and we're paying attention to that. But Simeon, I'd like to talk to you more about that, please.
The next one is, does the city have separate cost estimates for each levee reach 1 through 9? And if so, what are the projected costs for each levee reach, adding up to $400 million?
Yes, and you saw that diagram that was up there that showed all the different reaches, different numbered reaches. Yes, there is a cost estimate for each of those. I know who asked this question, and I'd be happy to share some of that information later on. But yes, it is being developed reach by reach.
There's no mention of seismic-induced, I don't know if I can't read the word or if it's too technical for me. Liquefaction potential. No shear wave velocity studies performed in something at boring sites. Maybe you can say that word.
In situ. Another one of my bosses are here tonight. I have many. One of the things that wasn't mentioned, we didn't want to get into the detail, but I talked about the studies that Department of Water Resources is doing. They have an independent panel of experts. These are people that were involved in the analysis of the Katrina failures. These are international authorities on earthquakes and liquefaction. I can tell you that it's being looked at. I can tell you that believe it or not, the seismic analysis on levees is not something that's commonly done. The reason for that is that it's considered a remote event that you would have this 200-year flood at the same time have the maximum earthquake event. That's a real remote. You start compounding low probability on low probability, and it's real low. But this independent group of consultants has asked the state to look at that, and their consultant, URS, is looking at that. I can tell you that Kleinfelder is looking at some of that. We are doing some assessment. We are doing, I mentioned some of this device that we push down in the ground. We can get good information to evaluate liquefaction. And if you want more of an answer, I'd be happy to talk to you later.
So we're done with the technical questions for now, which is good for all of us since I can't even state the words. So now we're going to ask Shanna Zussman from the City of West Sacramento to come up. We're going to ask a couple of financial related questions. Has the City of West Sac considered a mail vote similar to the City of Sacramento?
Thank you. Before I answer that, I thought I might just talk a little bit about the overall financing plan that we're currently working through and in the process of preparing. As you heard Ken mention before, sort of historically what we've been able to fund in West Sacramento is about 10% of the total project cost for levee improvements. And that's sort of the traditional local match that's typically required. What we're looking to do in the future is to be able to fund at least 10% of the total costs. And one of the ways that we're going to be doing that would be through a local parcel assessment, annual parcel assessment. And that's basically the mail-out vote that is referenced in relation to Sacramento. We would be looking to do a similar process here in West Sacramento. Ballots would be mailed to every property owner towards the end of May, and it would identify the amount that each parcel would pay for their annual assessment. And folks would be asked to vote on the assessment and return their ballots to the city. So as we mentioned before, the details of that assessment will be coming out in the future workshops, particularly in the May 15th workshop. We'll really go into the details of that formula. And then just as a closing comment on this question, the other component of the local funding that Ken alluded to is a mechanism for new development to contribute to the flood protection program through an in lieu fee.
What amount does the city estimate can be generated by the annual parcel assessment?
Sure. We're looking again at about 10.5% from the parcel assessment, which would be about $42 million.
We currently pay a flood control West Sacramento and 101 North Delta Water to our property tax yearly. What are you planning, and how much additional tax money are you asking for flood control?
Again, it would be a vote of the property owners for a new assessment district that would replace the existing assessment district for levee improvements. We'd be looking to raise about 10.5% of project costs, or about $42 million. The actual amount of the assessment for every parcel I don't have with me tonight, but again, we're going to go through that at a later date. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a couple of other questions. One of is a series of questions from Christina, and we were wondering if you could ask those down at the table downstairs. And then also there is a question here from Brent regarding FEMA, a couple of questions, and then we can answer those downstairs as well. So just to finish off this formal part of the presentation, just wanted to remind you that there is a website that's being updated quite frequently. So actually you'll see some of the questions that you've asked tonight asked and answered on the website in short order. And then there's also a way where you can ask questions via the website and have those responded to. You can certainly call the City of West Sacramento, and we'll give you a contact number in a minute, and someone can respond to your questions that way as well. And then we do have 3 upcoming public workshops on April 17th, May 15th, and June 5th. So we encourage you to come to one or all of those, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. So the breakout stations downstairs are on the 4 topics that you see listed here. There will be a number of folks down there who can answer as many questions as you have for them. And we really appreciate you coming tonight. I know there was a lot of information given to you this evening, and we hope you found it valuable. And we look forward to seeing you at the next workshop. Thank you very much. And don't forget, if you'd like to take the little comment cards with you, the cards to give to your associations, the little ones, please see us and we can give you those as well. Thank you.